Welcome to the Young Widow podcast, and thank you for joining today for episode 9, What Do You Do with Your Spouse's Things After Loss? I'm Britany, your host, and I'm happy that you could join today. First, I want to apologize for being out the past couple of weeks. We traveled, and then I went through a period where I lost my voice and it wasn't conducive for podcasting. Unfortunately, I was forced to take a slight break. But I am back and I'm ready to chat. Today, I want to chat about what do you do with your husband's things after loss? What do those emotions feel like? What are your options to do with their things? And then I want to give you some validation maybe in what I did with my husband's things, as well as some other widows that I work with in my coaching process. So let's get started. If you have listened to my podcast before, you know I like to start with how I traverse the issue within my grief journey and then go from there into the other topics. When my husband died, I actually didn't get rid of any of his things. I remember a couple weeks after my husband died, one of my best friends asked if I wanted help going through his things to figure out what to get rid of, what to put in boxes, and just kind of what to pack up. And I remember saying, no, why do I want to go through his things? And then thinking to myself, this is my husband's house. This is our life. His things belong here. Why would I want to pack them up? Now, mind you, I was only a few weeks into my grief journey, and usually a few weeks into the grief process is not a great time to pack up things. You're still in shock. You still don't understand what the reality is and how much that loss is going to affect your life, and you really haven't processed anything yet. So a few weeks into it definitely was not it for me. But I'd also like to say that I didn't pack up my husband's things for a year and a half. I didn't pack up my husband's things until we moved houses. For a year and a half after my husband died, if you stepped foot into my house, you would have thought the man was alive. His shoes were by the door. His wallet was on the counter with his keys and his phone. In the bathroom, he still had the toothbrush and cologne. His clothes were still packed in the dresser. I literally packed up nothing from my husband for the first year and a half after he died. And all in all, there's nothing wrong with that. It was something that I wanted to do because it gave me comfort. Seeing my husband's things reminded me that he was real. Reminded me that I wasn't living in a dream, that I did have a relationship. I was married for over 12 years, and this person existed at one point in time. People in my life thought that by having his things around, I was living in my grief and I wasn't accepting the loss. But the reality is that his things gave me comfort. And if I would have packed them up, I don't think I would have progressed as far along in my grief journey as I did in the first year and a half. After that year and a half, when I moved, my husband moved with me. What do I mean by that? I literally packed up my husband's things, put them in boxes, brought them to the new house that we live in today, and then I unpacked them. I didn't put them out in our new house like they would be if he was here. His shoes aren't by the door. His bathroom stuff isn't out on the counter. It doesn't look like he lives here. But I did allocate a closet to him in my new house. And the purpose of me doing that was that way I would have his things preserved. And if I ever felt like I needed to feel his presence and I needed to know he was real, I could open up the closet and his smell would permeate the air and I could see his things and I could touch them. If I'm being openly honest, I still have all of my husband's things. I've not donated anything. I've not given anything to any family or friends. And I've gotten rid of a few small things which were controversial to me 2-3 years into my grief, which was things like his toothbrush or his deodorant. But I still have other things like his cologne, all of his clothes, and his socks. Let's talk about socks. Just random topic here. My husband had to have like 30 or 40 pairs of socks. First of all, I have no idea why he needed that many socks, but you know what? I have them. And sometimes I put them on because they're comfortable to wear. And so I kept them. That's just a little bit about my grief journey and what I decided to do. I don't really care if somebody agrees with that or disagrees with that. For me, I know that his things give me comfort. It gives me a sense of remembering that he was here and that that was actually a part of my life. Sometimes in grief, it seems so unreal that it starts to make you question what really existed and what didn't exist, right? So let's talk about some emotions around packing up your spouse's things and figuring out what to do with them. It's a really emotional situation. It can almost make you feel like you're going through the initial stages of your grief all over again because you're packing up their things because they're not here. And subconsciously, you know that. And so it triggers you into an episode of raw emotion and grief, right? When my friends and family recommended that I packed up his things, I was actually royally offended by it. And if you're offended by it too, that's okay. I would recommend that you talk to them about it. Explain why you don't want to pack up their things. Explain why they're important to you. You should not pack up their things until you are ready to. I think that's really important to say. If somebody hasn't gone through spousal loss, they don't quite understand how those physical objects can really relate to your grief, give you comfort, and then bring you out of a grief wave. So I just want to say, if you haven't packed up their things, if people are pressuring you, you shouldn't do that before you want to. Second thing, it is very real for people to ask for things from your spouse. It could be their family, it could be their parents, their siblings, maybe it's their friends. They want something tangible as well because they also lost somebody. Now, if you're comfortable giving them something that you know really resonates with them, then there's nothing wrong with giving them a few items. If you don't feel like you can part with those items, you also shouldn't. I will say I have not given any of my husband's things to anybody. At one point in time, I thought about giving some of his hats because my husband used to wear ball caps to his brother. And I had set some aside and picked out the ones I was going to keep and then the ones I was going to give him. And I was ready to pack them up and take them to the post office. And then I decided not to. And this was 2 years ago. And so 2 years ago, I was 2.5 to 3 years into my grief, and I still wasn't ready to put his things in the mail and physically give them to somebody else. And so now I'm 4.5 going on 5 years, and I still haven't given anything away. That's me saying these are my husband's things and I'm not ready to give them to you yet. And if you feel that way, it's okay to tell your friends and family no. And they may be hurt by that, and they're justified to be hurt from that. But you're also justified in your decision. I think that it's important to say that in grief, you should be selfish. I'm going to say that one more time, and not everybody's going to agree with me. But in grief, you should be selfish. The third thing that could happen here is that somebody could recommend that you give them away, you donate them. Maybe somebody had a house fire and they say, hey, you could donate your husband's things here. That actually happened to me as well. And I still wasn't comfortable with it. Somebody in the small town that we lived in lost their house in a house fire, and there was an adult male that needed things that was probably my husband's size. I could have gave him a lot of things from my husband, but I chose not to. And I want to explain why I chose not to, because I'm not a terrible person. I am a very empathetic person. I do care about donating and helping people out. But I chose not to because I couldn't stand the thought of somebody else that wasn't my husband wearing his clothes around. Now, does that sound asinine because my husband's dead and he's never going to wear those things? 100%. But also at that same point, if I were to ever walk into the grocery store and that man were to be there and he were to be in the sweater that I gave my husband for Christmas, that would result in an emotional catastrophe for me. I feel like my brain would have always been searching for that person. Every time I went somewhere, I'd always be looking to see if somebody was wearing my husband's shoes or if somebody was wearing his clothes. And it's just a subconscious mentality that we're in. And so I chose not to donate my husband's things. And there's nothing wrong with it. There are some widows within my coaching group that I talk to that have gave the things away. Very much like I just talked about how I wasn't comfortable donating. They were comfortable donating it because they were just happy that the things were going to go to use. And for them, they kept their favorite sentimental things, maybe their favorite sweaters, then maybe their favorite book and the watch and a couple things like that. And then everything else they donated because they felt like it was just going to sit in a box. They were able to emotionally separate with their things. And so that's completely okay too. Now, there is a group here that is a lot smaller, but it's still really important for me to talk about. There are a group of widows that I work with on the mentoring and coaching side that did not pack up their husband's things, but also do not have them. How is that possible? For them, they couldn't figure out whether to keep the things or whether to let go of them. And they also didn't want to be the ones to pack them up. And so what they had decided to do was to allow somebody else in their life that was close to them handle that. They went through the things, they kind of decided what was sentimental, and then they left at that point and really allowed somebody else to put them in boxes and pack it up because it wouldn't be as emotional for that person as it would be for the widow themselves, right? There's also nothing wrong with that option. It is important to say that sometimes in our grief, an activity that needs to be done is so emotional and traumatic that we feel like somebody else can handle it for us. And maybe it's somebody we're close to and somebody that we have a personal relationship with. If you feel like you're in that group, if you feel like you're never going to be able to pack up their things, but also you don't know that you want to keep everything, that is a viable option for you. Maybe you have a close friend or maybe a close family member that can kind of really help you make those decisions and then be that ground there that can take care of it so you're not as emotionally affected by it. But adding to that, I will also say that one of the widows specifically that I talked to, she wasn't the one that packed the things up. but she still saw that the things were gone. So it was still really emotional for her, even though somebody else packed them up. It was emotional to be able to say, I'm ready to let go and give somebody else control of this in my grief. She feels like it would have been harder for her to pack them up herself. And so, even though it was emotional, she still has no regrets in her decision. So, those are a couple different scenarios that could happen when you start going through your loss journey and when you have to come to the point of what do you have to do with your husband's things. It's going to be overwhelming whether you pack it up in the first year, the second year, the fifth year, or the 10th year. And it's going to be overwhelming because it's going to trigger a grief wave for you and remind you that you are packing things because this person died. So give yourself a little bit of grace in that and understand that when you decide to pack up the things, you probably also need to allocate some time to emotionally recover from that. I think that is the best way to end this podcast. Whatever you do with your spouse's things in grief, as long as you have no regrets with it, then you are making the right decision. And you're making the right decision because you're making the decision for you. Because again, you should be selfish in your grief and you should be selfish in the way that you traverse it because nobody else is a widow to your spouse but you. And so, whatever you do, as long as you don't hold it against yourself, then there's no wrong decision here. Pack up the things, don't pack them up, sell them, put them in the attic, allow somebody else to take care of it. But really, nobody can make that decision other than you. A little bit shorter of a podcast here. You can jump on my Instagram. My handle's at the Young Widow Coach. I am happy to give you individual and personal one-on-one guidance within this area of your grief journey. So with that, thank you for joining me today. I'm sorry that I've been out for a significant period of time, and I'm really excited to be jumping back into the podcasting. This is one of my favorite things to do. While it can be emotional, I think it's really important to put the raw message out there so that way other widows can resonate with it and then validate their feelings. So again, thank you for joining me, and I will see you next week.